There is a silence that does not feel empty, it feels full. It is the silence of a presence carefully held at a distance. It is the quiet hum of another soul, close enough to touch, yet perceived. Through a pane of glass, you can see the warmth, the potential for a shared language, a shared world, but to reach for the latch to let that world in is to feel a peculiar and profound dread. It is not the fear of the stranger, but the more haunting fear of the familiar. It is the preemptive grief for a loss that has not yet happened, the heart's paradoxical retreat from the very thing it seeks, building its own beautiful, solitary confinement out of the bricks of what-ifs and the mortar of remember-whens. It begins not with a slam, but with a sigh. A space, meticulously curated, emerges. Between two people, it is not the dramatic chasm of an argument, but the quiet, almost elegant construction of a buffer zone. This is the architecture of distance, a discipline practiced not with malice, but with the desperate precision of a cartographer redrawing a map to avoid a known, yet unmarked precipice. Watch closely, you can see the masons at work in the everyday. A sentence is left unfinished, not out of forgetfulness, but as a deliberate act of editing. The most revealing part is withheld, creating a sentence that is grammatically correct, but emotionally incomplete. A question is asked, and the answer, though truthful, lands with the soft thud of a neutral fact, stripped of the emotional context that would make it feel like a gift. The phone is set down, and for a moment the fingers hover over the keyboard, a response drafted in the mind, but then the hand pulls back. The message is left on read. This is not a rejection of the other person, it is a ritual of preservation. Each unsent text, each deflected vulnerability, is another brick laid in the wall, a silent prayer for safety. The language of this architecture is one of subtle negatives. It is not what is done, but what is not done, the invitation not extended, for fear it would become a routine. The hand not held, for fear its absence later would feel colder. The full force of a smile not unleashed, for fear it would set a precedent of a happiness that cannot be guaranteed. The self is presented in a carefully curated exhibition, the messy backrooms of the soul. The half-finished thoughts, the raw and unprocessed feelings are kept off limits. What is displayed is pleasant, interesting, but ultimately a protected collection. It is a performance of connection, where the script has been written to ensure no one ad-libs a line that could shatter the delicate stage set. This is often mistaken for independence, a strength, and there is a certain strength here. The kind found in a fortress, but the inhabitant of a fortress is not just a defender. They are also a prisoner. The walls, designed to keep threat out, inevitably end up boxing the self in. The very act of monitoring the gates, of checking the sightlines, requires a constant low-grade psychic energy. It is exhausting. The heart becomes a watchman, always on duty, its gaze forever turned outward, scanning the horizon for the first sign of the emotional storm that it is certain must come. And so a relationship, a potential friendship, proceeds along two parallel tracks. There is the track of action, conversations are had, meals are shared, laughter echoes in a room. But on the adjacent track, the track of meaning, a different narrative is being written. Narrative of caution, a story where every moment of closeness is simultaneously enjoyed and mentally filed away as a future source of pain. It is a form of emotional hedging, an attempt to preemptively mourn a loss so that when it inevitably arrives, it will not hurt as much. The tragedy, of course, is that this preemptive grief is the only certain thing in the present moment. The actual loss may never come, but its ghost is already a permanent resident, paying rent in the currency of anticipation. The architecture is so refined, so seamlessly integrated into the personality, that it often goes unnoticed by the architect themselves. It feels like nature, it feels like prudence. It feels like the only sane way to navigate a world where everything beautiful is, by its very nature, temporary. To build a little distance is to try and cheat time, to soften the blow of an ending by never fully allowing a beginning. It is the construction of a beautiful, solitary room at the very heart of a shared house, a place to retreat to when the fear becomes a whisper, then a roar that says, "This will not last, protect yourself now." To understand the fortress, one must visit the ruins upon which it was built. The blueprint for this architecture of distance was not drawn in the present. Its lines were etched faintly but indelibly in the earliest rooms of a life. In the nursery, this is where the ghost first took form, not a specter of malice, but a shape born from the fragile, developing logic of an infant heart, learning the rules of existence. Before language there is need, before thought there is sensation, a cry in the dark. Cold of a wet diaper, the gnawing hollow of hunger. This is the raw data of the infant world, and the response, or its delay or its absence, is the first lesson in connection. If the cry is consistently met with a warm embrace, a full belly, a soothing voice, the world begins to cohere around a fundamental truth. My need summons a response. I am heard, I am held, I exist in a relational field. But if the response is inconsistent, a lottery of comfort and despair, or if it is absent, leaving the cry to echo into a void, a different lesson is learned. Need is a risk. The reaching out of the self is a potential catastrophe. The very act of wanting becomes intertwined with the terror of not receiving the other. The source of all comfort is also the potential source of all anguish. This is the primal wound. The moment connection first cast the long shadow of loss. These are not memories in the narrative sense. They are imprints. They are the body's memory. A certain type of silence can still trigger a wave of formless dread in an adult. Specific tone of voice, perhaps one of dismissal or distraction, can cause the stomach to clench with an ancient, wordless fear. The ghost is not a story that can be told. It is a physiological state, a neural pathway worn deep by the repetitive wheels of early experience. It is the feeling that to need is to be weak, and to be weak is to be vulnerable to an abandonment that feels, to a child, like annihilation. The ghost takes on more defined features as life continues. Perhaps it was the parent whose love felt conditional, given only for good grades or good behavior, teaching that acceptance is a performance, not a birthright. Or the beloved childhood friend who moved away without warning, leaving a bedroom full of toys and a heart full of questions. The first pet whose lifeless body in the garden was a brutal, unsoftened introduction to mortality. These events are the bricks that build upon the foundational imprint. They are the evidence the mind collects to support its nascent theory. To love something is to designate it for loss. To attach is to pre-approve a future agony. Heart, in its desperate, intelligent attempt to protect itself, begins to draft a simple, devastating equation: connection equals pain. And so the ghost in the nursery grows. It is no longer just an imprint of early need. It becomes a prophet. It is the internal voice that, at the threshold of any new intimacy, begins to whisper its prophecies of doom. Don't get too close. It will only hurt more when they leave. See how wonderful this feels. That is how terrible its absence will be. The ghost does not speak from a place of hatred, but from a twisted, protective love. It is the guardian of the original wounded child, and its sole mission is to never, ever let that child feel that particular brand of helplessness again. It mistakes the absence of pain for the presence of safety. Not realizing it has created a different kind of pain, the chronic, low-grade ache of isolation. This ghost is a quiet tenant. It does not haunt with loud noises in the night. It haunts with subtleties, with the slight hesitation before saying I love you, with the instinct to find a flaw in a potential partner before their virtues become too compelling. It is the reason a promotion can feel frightening, because it invites a new identity that could be taken away. It is the background radiation of a life organized around a central, unspoken conviction that the other shoe is always inevitably about to drop. The ghost is the keeper of that shoe, and it has been holding it aloft for a lifetime, waiting for the moment to let it fall. The ghost's whispers are not mere superstition. They are translated into a biological mandate, a rigorous internal logic that the entire organism is enlisted to obey. This is the anxious heart's calculus, a cold and efficient equation run on the wetware of the brain, designed for a single purpose: survival. The feeling of dread when leaning into connection is not a character flaw. It is the activation of a primordial defense system. mistaking emotional vulnerability for physical peril. At the command center of this system is the amygdala, two small, almond-shaped clusters of neurons deep within the temporal lobe. It is the brain's sentinel, its primary role to scan the environment for threat. It is not a sophisticated thinker, it is a reactor. It operates on crude, ancient data, and for a brain patterned by early loss or inconsistent care, intimacy is registered as a threat of the highest order. The amygdala does not understand the poetry of a shared glance or the tenderness of a held hand. It interprets the potential for rejection as a life or death scenario, a reliving of that primal infant terror where the absence of a caregiver truly did mean existential danger. When a text message goes unanswered for an hour, it is not the modern mind that panics. It is the amygdala screaming that the tribe has abandoned you, that you are alone on the savannah, exposed and vulnerable. It commands the body, sound the alarm. And the body obeys. The hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis kicks into gear. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood the bloodstream. The heart rate accelerates, pumping blood to the muscles for flight or fight. The breath shallows, the palms may sweat. This is the full physiological cascade of fear, ignited by the prospect of emotional closeness. The mind, seeking to make sense of this internal hurricane, looks for a cause. It latches onto the most immediate source of the vulnerability, the relationship itself, and constructs a narrative of impending doom. Their silence means they are losing interest. Their compliment is too good to be true. This happiness is a prelude to pain. These are not irrational thoughts in the context of this activated biology. They are the logical conclusions of a nervous system that has been trained to see connection as a catalyst for collapse. This is where cognitive distortions, those systematic errors in thinking, become the trusted lieutenants of the amygdala, fortune-telling, the absolute certainty that this connection will end in loss, catastrophizing the belief that this loss will be unendurable, a shattering event from which one will never recover. Emotional reasoning, I feel afraid, therefore this must be dangerous. These are not signs of a broken mind, but of a mind that has become too efficient at protecting itself from a specific, historically validated pain. The calculus is brutal, but from the inside it feels like the only sane response to a dangerous world. The heart does a cost-benefit analysis, and the potential searing pain of future loss always outweighs the gentle, present-moment ache of loneliness. Loneliness is a known quantity, a familiar companion. The agony of abandonment is a specter of unimaginable power. The tragic irony is that this exquisite defense system often creates the very dynamic it seeks to avoid. The hypervigilance for signs of rejection can manifest as neediness or suspicion, which may push the other person away. The preemptive withdrawal, designed to soften a future blow, can be read as coldness or disinterest, creating the distance that was so feared. The system, designed for self-preservation, becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is a closed loop, a hall of mirrors where every reflection confirms the original fear. The brain, armed with its ancient hardware and its flawed, fear-based software, successfully defends the fortress, never realizing it has imprisoned the very soul it was built to protect. It wins the battle against immediate vulnerability, but in doing so, it loses the war for a whole and connected life. Within the fortress, a deep and quiet war is waged. It is a civil war of the spirit, a conflict between two fundamental opposing needs, the need for connection and the need for safety. This is the territory of the self in amber, a state of suspended animation. The soul is preserved perfectly intact, shielded from the corrupting influences of time and touch and loss, but it is also trapped, unable to move, to grow, to feel the sun. It is a beautiful, heartbreaking stasis. From one side of the ramparts, the world calls. The yearning for connection is a biological and spiritual imperative. It is the longing to be known, to have one's inner landscape witnessed and acknowledged. It is the desire to share the weight of a thought, the color of a feeling, the silent, private movie of one's own consciousness with another. This yearning is the heart's natural gravity, pulling it towards the warmth of Others, it whispers of shared laughter that stitches souls together, of a glance that holds. An entire unspoken conversation, of the profound comfort of existing in the presence of. Another without the need for performance or defense, it is the promise of being. Reflected in another's eyes, and in that reflection, understanding oneself more fully. But from the other side, the watchtower sounds its alarm, the need for safety, for the old fires of past wounds raises its voice. It speaks not of potential joy, but of certain pain. It replays the old tapes, the sound of a door closing, the sight of a retreating back. The cold emptiness of a promise broken. It argues with the ruthless logic of the traumatized. To be known is to be seen is to be judged is to be found wanting, to be found wanting is to be abandoned. It is a syllogism of self. Protection, and its conclusion is always isolation. This voice does not feel like a jailer. It feels like a wise and cautious friend, the only one who truly has your best interests at heart. It advocates for the integrity of the self, even if that integrity means a life of solitude. Caught between these two powerful forces, the self becomes paralyzed. It is like a bird that simultaneously yearns for the sky and fears the height of its own wings. Every step towards another person is followed by 2 steps back into the familiar confines. Self-relationships are approached as delicate negotiations, every word and gesture analyzed for its potential as a future weapon. A compliment is not simply absorbed, it is held up to the light, examined for flaws, for hidden barbs, and offered vulnerability from. Another is met not with reciprocal openness, but with a surge of internal panic. They are showing me this, now I must show them something of equal value. But what if what I have is not enough? The simple, flowing dance of human connection becomes a rigid, choreographed series of steps, each one calculated for minimal risk. The result is a profound and peculiar loneliness. It is not the loneliness of being physically alone, which can often be a state of peace. This is the loneliness of being with someone and yet feeling utterly separate. It is the loneliness of hearing one's own voice narrate the experience from a distance, commenting on the interaction instead of living within it. The self, preserved in amber, watches the world of feeling from behind a thick, transparent wall. It can see the colors of intimacy but cannot feel its warmth. It can observe the dance of relationship but cannot move to its music. It is the deepest loneliness of all, to be a sentient creature, longing for the ocean while choosing to remain forever in the desert, simply because the ocean contains the possibility of a storm. The architecture of distance is not a life sentence. It is a structure, and like all structures, it is subject to erosion, to weathering, to the quiet, persistent pressure of a truth that can no longer be contained. The turning point is never a demolition. It is a hairline fracture, a sliver of light piercing a room that has known only the dim glow of self. Protection, it is not a roar of defiance, but a whisper of surrender, a surrender to the simple, terrifying fact that the certainty of isolation has become more painful than the uncertainty of connection. This crack does not form in the midst of drama. It appears in a moment of profound ordinariness. Perhaps it is the sight of an elderly couple, their hands intertwined on a park bench, their silence a testament to a lifetime of shared history. And in that moment, the prophecy of inevitable loss is challenged by a quieter, more profound truth. Possibility of endurance, or it is the weariness that arrives after yet another perfectly pleasant, perfectly empty social performance. The soul grows tired of its own curation. The energy required to maintain the fortress finally exceeds the fear of what lies beyond its walls. The heart, exhausted by its own vigilant calculations, simply stops computing. The first crack is an action so small it would be invisible to an outside observer. It is an internal shift. It is the decision to leave a message on read for just 5 minutes longer than feels safe, to tolerate the fizzy anxiety in the chest without immediately acting to quell it. It is the act of taking a breath, and instead of deflecting a compliment with a joke, allowing it to land just for a second, allowing the warmth of another's regard to touch the skin before the old instincts slap it away. It is the courage to sit with terrifying vulnerability of being truly seen in a positive light, without the immediate urge to dim oneself to a safer, less noticeable level. It is the moment a personal story, previously kept in the private vault of the self, feels in. Impulse to be shared, the words form, they travel to the throat, the old gatekeepers shout their warnings, but this time the gates are not instantly sealed. There is a pause. Hesitation where two potential futures hang in the balance, and then the words are spoken. They are not polished, they are not the whole story, they are a fragment. Offered raw and unedited, it feels less like a gift and more like a risk, a piece of one's inner world placed gently in the hands of another, with no guarantee it will be held. Carefully, the act itself is the transformation, the outcome is almost irrelevant. Courage was in the offering. This is not the absence of fear, it is intimacy with fear, it is feeling the ancient amygdala scream its alarm, the cortisol coursing through the veins, the mind racing with catastrophic predictions and yet making a different choice. It is looking directly at the ghost in the nursery, acknowledging its presence and its protective intent, and gently saying, I hear you, I know you are trying to keep me safe, but I must try something different now. It is choosing the possibility of a real, messy, and potentially painful over the guaranteed, sterile ache of a life lived in a self-made shell. It is the heart, after lifetime of flinching, deciding to lean in just a fraction of an inch, and in that lane, the entire architecture of a life begins, imperceptibly, to reconfigure. Healing is not the dismantling of the fortress. It is the slow, patient work of adding more doors, more windows. It is learning that the heart can be both a sanctuary and a place of welcome. This final stage is not an arrival, but a practice. It is the painstaking process of learning a new language, the language of gentle, sustained, and imperfect intimacy. After a lifetime of speaking only the stark dialect of defense, this new language begins not with words directed at another, but with the internal monologue. It is the practice of meeting one's own fear with curiosity instead of contempt. When the old urge to withdraw arises, the new question is not, what is wrong with me, but what is this feeling protecting me from right now? It is tracing the panic back to its origin, not to dwell there, but to understand its context, to see the ghost not as a malevolent force, but as a misguided guardian. This internal compassion creates a foundation of safety from which to reach outward if the self is no longer at war with its own protective instincts. It has more energy to engage with the world. The practice continues in the smallest of interactions. It is a conscious rewiring, repetition of new neural pathways. It is the decision to send that text, to extend that invitation, to hold that gaze for 1 second longer than is comfortable. Each time this is done and the anticipated catastrophe does not occur, the amygdala's alarm rings. Slightly less loudly, the brain collects new data. It learns that a delayed reply can mean a busy day, not a dying interest. It learns that a shared vulnerability is often met with gratitude, not judgment. It learns that conflict, when navigated with respect, does not have to mean abandonment. It can, in fact, lead to a deeper understanding. This is the slow, unglamorous work of building trust with life itself. The goal is not to become fearless, but to develop a different relationship with fear. The voice that once commanded retreat now becomes a signal, a gentle indicator. Tender place that needs attention. The impulse to build distance is noticed, acknowledged, and sometimes consciously overruled. It is the practice of allowing connection to unfold at its own pace, without the frantic need to either accelerate it to false sense of security or sabotage it to confirm an old prophecy. It is learning to tolerate the beautiful, terrifying ambiguity of a relationship that is alive and growing, one that is not yet defined by its ending. This new language is spoken in the prose of daily life, not the poetry of grand gestures. It is found in the willingness to be bored with someone, to share a quiet Tuesday evening where nothing of note is said, and yet everything is communicated. It is the courage to be ordinary in the presence of another, to let the curated self relax its grip and reveal the unremarkable, authentic person underneath. It is the understanding that True intimacy is built not in a few dramatic moments, but in the countless, quiet moments in between. It is the accumulation of shared sunsets, of collaborative meals, of silent companionship during a difficult task. This is the mortar that holds the new structure together. And so the heart learns a new rhythm. It learns that connection and loss are not a single fused entity, but two separate notes in the complex symphony of a human life. To love is to risk loss, yes, but to withhold love is to guarantee it, the loss of all the joy, growth and solace that intimacy provides. The heart that has known the fear of connection that feels like loss does not forget its history. It carries the ghost with it, but no longer allows it to dictate the future. It builds its home not as an impenetrable fortress, but as a house with an open door, knowing that every guest will one day leave, but choosing to cherish the warmth they bring while they are there. It is the ultimate act of courage to love softly and persistently, not because it is safe, but because it is the only way to feel truly, fully alive.